Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is Side 2 of For the Record program number 325, The Past is Prologue, subtitled The Eve of Destruction, being recorded on September 16th of the year 2001. This broadcast is reviewing some excerpts from recent For the Record programs, specifically from the summer of 2001, and when the information on Side A and the information you're about to hear on Side B are taken in conjunction with one another, and what has happened afterward, and when that is seen in the context of what took place before, I think these events may be seen as constituting perhaps a run-up to the terrorist blitzkrieg of September 11th of the year 2001. What we're going to do now is to listen to an excerpt of For the Record program number 315. The broadcast is called Not So Fortunate Son. It's about, among other things, the death of J.H. Hatfield, the author of an unauthorized biography of George W. Bush, which, among other things, makes the connections between the family of Osama bin Laden and George W. Bush's First Energy Company. Note in particular the position of the BCCI. That was the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, a bank that was essentially an intelligence front and that was centrally involved in the Iran-Contra machinations. Had the investigation into that gone through properly, it would not only have unseated the elder George Bush, but it would have gone forward in time and tarred the younger George Bush as well. However, the Bush Justice Department prosecutor in charge of that investigation, Robert Mueller, was appointed head of the FBI on July 8th. This is once again excerpted from For the Record program number 315 from July 22nd of the year 2001, and in turn, you will hear excerpts within excerpts. You'll hear For the Record program 186, excerpted into 277, excerpted into 315. In a number of different broadcasts, by the way, this is being recorded on July 22nd of the year 2001. On a number of different broadcasts, I've discussed the connection between George Bush, a fellow named James R. Bath, Arbusto Energy, which is George W. Bush's First Energy Company, and the family of Osama bin Laden. I've discussed this in For the Record programs numbered 182, 186, 248, 256, and 277, and we're going to review some of those connections as well as some of the other material relevant to Osama bin Laden from past For the Records in just a minute. In yesterday's New York Times, yesterday being July 21st of the year 2001, there was a brief mention of a death, and that is the only mention I have seen in print so far. The death is the death of James H. Hatfield, who was the author of the unauthorized biography of George W. Bush titled Fortunate Son, George W. Bush and the Making of an American President. This book was published, and it makes allegations about George W. Bush's having been convicted of a drug violation, and then the volume was promptly recalled after it was disclosed that James H. Hatfield had lied about his own criminal past. In past discussions of this book, I've speculated about the possibility, and it is just that perhaps James H. Hatfield's background was known about, and that was why this information was channeled to him, was to discredit, ultimately, James H. Hatfield and, by extension, any discussion of George W. Bush and alleged drug abuse. This is the only mention I had seen in print of this particular story, and once again, this is a brief article in the National Briefing section of the New York Times from Saturday, July 21st of the year 2001. This is an AP story. It's headlined by the New York Times, Arkansas, author of Bush book dies. The author of a book that accused George W. Bush of covering up a cocaine arrest has died of a drug overdose, the police said. The author, James H. Hatfield, 43, wrote Fortunate Son, George W. Bush and the Making of an American President in 1999. Distribution of the unauthorized biography was halted after it was revealed that Mr. Hatfield had lied in interviews about his own criminal past. The police in Springdale, Arkansas, said they did not suspect foul play in the death on Wednesday. A friend heard a mention of this on CNN, and his relating of that, I did not hear this myself, was that the death was reported as an apparent suicide. Well, whether it was suicide, whether it was a, quote, overdose of a street drug, I cannot say, obviously, precisely how James H. Hatfield died, but I should emphasize that I am very suspicious about the circumstances surrounding his death. Whatever the truth concerning the allegations of drug abuse and a possible arrest of George W. Bush in the past, this unauthorized biography, Fortunate Son, George W. Bush and the Making of an American President, was more than a little important because it mentioned an apparent connection between the milieu of Osama bin Laden and George W. Bush. It's actually a hard connection between the family of Osama bin Laden and George W. Bush, whether or not, as is speculated, the family of Osama bin Laden actually put up a portion of the working capital that went to found Arbusto Energy. Certainly, an individual who allegedly did put up that capital it was the Texas business representative for the bin Laden family. What we're going to do next is to listen to an excerpt concerning Fortunate Son and also a book about the BCCI called The Outlaw Bank. This is from For the Record program number 277, and as noted, the Bush-Bin Laden-James R. Bath connection is mentioned in For the Records 182, 186, 248, and 256, in addition to For the Record program number 277, which you're about to hear excerpted. We listen to the following from For the Record program number 186. Review some of the aspects of the George Bush bin Laden connection and add some supplemental material. We're going to take a look at a suppressed biography of George Bush. This is entitled Fortunate Son, subtitled George W. Bush and the Making of an American President. This was authored by J. H. Hatfield, published in hardcover by St. Martin's Press, copyright 1999. Actually, it was copyright 2000 by Omega Publishing, although it came out in 1999. And this book was suppressed and recalled after it came out that J. H. Hatfield had a criminal record. Of the connection between the bin Laden family and George W. Bush through his Arbusto Energy Company, we read as follows in Fortunate Son. Speaking of Bush, J. H. Hatfield writes, in June 1977, he formed his own drilling company, Arbusto Energy. Arbusto means bush in Spanish. Like his father, who made his fortune in the oil business with the money of others, George W. founded Arbusto with the financial backing of investors including James R. Bath, a Houston businessman whom Bush apparently first met when they were in the same Texas Air National Guard unit. Tax documents and personal financial records show that Bath, an aircraft broker with business ties to Saudi Arabian sheiks, had invested $50,000 in Arbusto, granting him a 5% interest in two limited partnerships controlled by Bush. In one of the most bizarre footnotes to history, Time magazine described Bath in 1991 as, quote, a deal broker whose alleged associations run from the CIA to a major shareholder and director of the Bank of Credit and Commerce, unquote. BCCI, as it was more commonly known, was closed down in July of 1991 amid charges of multi-billion-dollar fraud and worldwide news reports that the institution had been involved in covert intelligence work, drug money laundering, arms brokering, bribery of government officials, and aid to terrorists. An accounting commission by the Bank of England finally exposed the extent of BCCI's deficits and criminal offenses, forcing the bank's eventual collapse. Bath was never directly implicated in the BCCI scandal, but according to the Outlaw Bank, an award-winning 1993 book by Time correspondents Jonathan Beatty and S.C. Gwynn, Bath originally, quote, made his fortune by investing money for Sheikh Khalid bin Mahfouz and another BCCI-connected Saudi, Sheikh bin Laden, unquote. Allegedly the father of none other than Osama bin Laden, the man accused by the U.S. government of masterminding the August 1998 terrorist bombings of the American embassy in Kenya and Tanzania, which killed more than 250 people. According to news reports, in a 1976 trust agreement drawn shortly after Bush's father was appointed director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Saudi Sheikh Salem M. bin Laden appointed Bath as his business representative in Texas. Bin Laden, along with his brothers, owned Bin Laden Brothers Construction, one of the largest construction companies in the Middle East. In a 1991 deposition, Bath testified he was the sole director of Skyway Aircraft Leasing Limited, a Houston company owned by Khalid bin Mahfouz.
bin Mahfouz had been a major shareholder in BCCI, which had been accused of using Mideast oil money to seek ties to political leaders in other countries throughout the 1970s and 1980s. By the way, I would note that Oliver North used BCCI for many of his Iran-Contra machinations. Skipping down, Time reporters Beatty and Gwynn suggest in their book that the $50,000 Bath invested in George W.'s Arbusto Energy drilling company may have belonged to Bath's Saudi clients, since the Houston businessman, quote, had no substantial money of his own at the time, unquote. Ironically, the money used to underwrite the first business venture of a possible future president of the United States may have been derived, at least in part, from the family fortune of Saudi terrorist Osama bin Laden. According to court documents, Bath also swore that in 1977 he represented 4 prominent and wealthy Saudi Arabians as a trustee and used his name on their investments in the United States. In return, he received a 5% interest in their deals. Federal authorities, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and the FBI later investigated Bath after allegations were made by one of his American business partners that the Saudis were using Bath and their enormous financial sources to influence U.S. policy. And skipping down, in 1990, in an attempt to distance himself and his presidential father from the growing BCCI scandal, George W. stated in an interview that neither he nor the elder Bush had ever conducted business with James Bath. Jr. went on record at the time as saying that he met the Houston businessman in 1970 when both were fighter pilots at the Air National Guard base at Ellington. President Bush, quote, knows Bath the way he knows thousands of people, unquote, his son told the press, and the two men could not be considered good friends. Quote, I've never done business with him, Bath, and I know the president hasn't either, unquote. Well, at least in the case of George W., he was lying. He obviously had been doing business with him. He was Bath owned 5% in 2 limited partnerships controlled by Bush. Note again that, as written here by J.H. Hatfield, Saudi Sheikh Salem M. bin Laden appointed Bath as his business representative in Texas. So Bath was Sheikh bin Laden's business representative in Texas, that the father of Osama bin Laden. More about George W.'s denial of knowing Bath, and again, that was obviously a lie. A few months later, however, the release of tax documents and personal financial records forced George W. to admit that Bath had indeed been one of Arbusto Energy's original investors. Bush said that to his knowledge, Bath's investment was from personal funds, and no available evidence existed to determine that the money came from Saudi interests. Numerous questions remain unanswered as to Bath's motives behind his investment in George W.'s first business venture. And in a footnote, U.S. intelligence agencies were concerned that bin Laden might attempt to assassinate George W. or the former president when both men toured the Middle East and met with Arab and Jewish leaders in November of 1998, only 4 months after the embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. And bear in mind that when Bath invested $50,000 in Arbusto Energy, as written here and reported by Time magazine reporters Beatty and Gwynn, Time, a very conservative publication, by the way, the Houston businessman, quote, had no substantial money of his own at the time. And as noted by Hatfield, ironically, the money used to underwrite the first business venture of a possible future president of the United States may have been derived, at least in part, from the family fortune of Saudi terrorist Osama bin Laden. More about the Bath-bin Laden-Bush connection from a book which was cited in that J.H. Hatfield book, Fortunate Son, a suppressed biography. This is about BCCI. It's called The Outlaw Bank, subtitled A Wild Ride into the Secret Heart of BCCI. This is co-authored by Jonathan Beatty, B-E-A-T-Y, and S.C. Gwynn, G-W-Y-N-N-E. It's copyright 1993 by Ramjack Incorporated, and this was published in the United States by Random House. And the White referred to here is a Bill White, who was a business partner of James R. Bath, and later found himself at loggerheads with Mr. Bath. Quote, and this is Bill White talking here about his former business partner and eventual enemy. You have to understand that I thought, beginning again, you have to understand that they thought I was one of them, unquote, White said earnestly. Again quoting, Bath told me that he was in the CIA. He told me he had been recruited by George Bush himself in 1976 when Bush was director of the agency. That made sense to me, especially in light of what I had seen once we went into business together. Bath and George Jr. were pals and flew together in the same Air National Guard unit, and Bath lived just down the street from the Bush family when George Sr. was living in Houston. He said Bush wanted him involved with the Arabs and to get into the aviation business, unquote. White began pulling documents out of his cases as he talked. Quote, "That's how Bath,